The galaxy had always been a vast and diverse expanse, filled with a wide array of species, planets, and cultures. While cooperation between different factions was not unheard of, it was often tenuous at best, with each species looking out for their own interests, often at the expense of others. But the balance of the galaxy was about to shift, and no one was prepared for the storm that was coming. It began with a signal. A distress call, weak but unmistakable, broadcast from the outer rim of the galaxy. The transmission came from an uncharted sector of space, a place that no civilization had ventured into in centuries. Those who heard it were puzzled. It was a message not just from one ship, but a collection of different ships, from various species, all warning of an impending invasion. A dark force, an unstoppable enemy known only as the Goroth, had arrived. They were a race of conquerors, capable of destroying entire planets with a single blow. Their technology was far beyond anything the galaxy's most advanced civilizations had ever seen. And they had no intention of negotiating. At first, the news was dismissed. The Goroth were a legend, a myth, something whispered about in the darker corners of the galaxy. But soon, their presence became undeniable. Reports from the outer rim poured in, each one more horrifying than the last. The Goroth fleet was massive, overwhelming, and they showed no mercy. The news spread like wildfire, and soon, even the most skeptical leaders had to admit the unthinkable truth: the galaxy was under attack. The first to respond were the military forces of the major galactic powers, the Altair, the Velder, the Zelra, and the Tregori, each of whom had long held dominion over vast sectors of space. But their efforts were in vain. The Goroth struck with precision and ferocity, devastating entire fleets before they even had a chance to engage. With each passing day, the Goroth grew stronger, and the defenders weaker. On Earth, the situation was no different. Humanity had spent centuries expanding beyond their home planet, establishing colonies on distant worlds, and forging alliances with species from across the stars. But when the Goroth arrived at the borders of human space, the response was no more successful than that of the other races. The human military was powerful, formidable even, but not nearly enough to hold off the tide of the Goroth's relentless assault. In the midst of this chaos, the leaders of humanity convened. There was no question that the galaxy was in peril, but the question remained: could humanity, a species that had only just recently emerged from its own history of division and conflict, unite in the face of this existential threat? President Elena Reyes stood at the helm of this monumental challenge. Known for her calm demeanor and sharp intellect, she was one of the few who believed in humanity's ability to not just survive, but to prevail. While the galaxy around her trembled, she saw an opportunity for humanity to unite not just with itself, but with every species across the stars. But time was running out. The Goroth were advancing faster than anyone could have predicted. The call for a galactic summit went out, one that would bring together representatives from all corners of the galaxy. The Altair, the Velder, the Zelra, and the Tregori, along with humanity, would have to set aside their differences and come together to confront the darkness that loomed over them all. If they failed, the galaxy would fall. As the representatives arrived at the neutral station, a former military outpost now converted for diplomacy, tensions were high. Each species had their own reservations about humanity's role in this crisis. The Altair were known for their pride, the Velder for their secrecy, the Zelra for their independence, and the Tregori for their unyielding thirst for power. Each of them had their own agendas, their own fears, and their own visions of the future. But none of that mattered now. The Goroth were coming. President Reyes addressed the assembly, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "We stand at the precipice of extinction," she began. "And yet, we have a choice. We can either fall apart and let the Goroth destroy us one by one, or we can unite, humanity, and all the civilizations of the galaxy, and fight as one. Together, we can stop them. But only if we work together." Her words, though simple, struck a chord with those present. For the first time in the entire galaxy's history, the leaders of the most powerful civilizations were facing the same enemy. They had no choice but to stand united or fall separately. And so, as the summit concluded, a fragile alliance was born. Humanity, the Alter, the Velder, the Zelra, and the Tregori had agreed to set aside their differences, for now, and focus on the greater enemy. But even as the delegates shook hands and exchanged formal pleasantries, an underlying tension remained. Trust had not yet been earned, and the future was uncertain. The galaxy was about to learn that when faced with extinction, even the most disparate of species could be forced to come together, forging a bond that would change the galaxy forever. And the first step in that journey would be humanity's leadership in the fight against the Goroth. The odds were stacked against them, but the flame of hope burned brighter than it ever had before. As the summit concluded, the leaders returned to their home systems, each carrying a heavy burden. The galaxy had never seen an alliance like this one, a delicate coalition of species with their own histories of war, betrayal, and mistrust. But now, for the first time, they shared a common enemy. The question was, could this fragile unity survive long enough to make a difference? Humanity's task was clear. President Elena Reyes knew that Earth's military forces could not defeat the Goroth alone, but she also recognized something crucial: humanity had a unique strength that the other galactic powers lacked. While the Alter, the Velder, the Zelra, and the Tregori had the advantage of greater technology and military might, humanity was unpredictable, resourceful, and driven by an unyielding spirit to survive. It was this humanity factor that she hoped could tip the scales. Behind closed doors, a high-level team of human military strategists, scientists, and engineers began crafting a plan. The goal was nothing short of the impossible: to find a way to fight back against the Goroth using humanity's ingenuity, even if they were outmatched in terms of sheer power. General Marcus Kane, a decorated veteran of humanity's previous conflicts, was put in charge of the operation. Known for his no-nonsense approach, he wasted no time in gathering his team. "We need to think outside the box," he said during their first briefing. "Our enemy is overwhelming in both size and firepower. But we have something they don't: creativity, adaptability, and sheer will. Let's make those work for us." The plan was audacious. The Goroth, as it turned out, relied heavily on a single, massive command ship that coordinated their entire fleet. If this ship could be destroyed or disabled, it might buy the galaxy enough time to regroup and retaliate. But getting to it would be no small feat. The ship was heavily guarded and located deep within Goroth-controlled space. To make matters worse, the Goroth had a vast network of mines and weapon platforms scattered across the region, designed to destroy any ships that ventured too close. Humanity's plan was simple in theory: infiltrate Goroth territory using stealth technology, disable the command ship's defenses, and strike with a decisive blow. However, this plan was riddled with complications. The Goroth's advanced sensor systems made stealth near impossible, and their ships were equipped with energy shields that could withstand most modern weapons. In the face of these odds, a proposal emerged that shocked even the most seasoned officers in the room. Dr. Sophie Liu, a brilliant scientist specializing in advanced energy systems, suggested the unthinkable: the development of a new type of weapon capable of bypassing the Goroth's shields. It would be a long-range, high-powered pulse that could disrupt the Goroth's energy fields for just a few precious seconds, enough time for a small, highly trained team to strike at the heart of the enemy. To create such a weapon, however, humanity would need to utilize all the resources at their disposal, resources they didn't yet have, and resources that the other species of the galaxy were unwilling to share. The Velder, for example, were known for their distrust of humanity, and they refused to provide any sort of military technology or support. The Alter, though more cooperative, had their own agendas, and the Tregori were too focused on their own ambitions to offer assistance. Only the Zelra, the most independent of all the galactic species, had offered any form of aid, but their contribution was minimal. As Reyes reviewed the plans, she realized the stakes were higher than anyone had imagined. The Goroth were not just an external threat, they represented an existential crisis for the entire galaxy. The unification of the galactic powers was fragile, and if humanity failed, it might fracture the alliance before it had a chance to truly take root. Trust, once lost, was difficult to regain, and failure in the face of such overwhelming odds would have long-lasting repercussions for all involved. The next challenge was the recruitment of the right personnel for the mission. The team would need to be elite, individuals with exceptional skills, knowledge, and above all, courage. General Kane and Dr. Liu selected a handful of soldiers, scientists, and engineers who could work together under extreme pressure. Among them was Captain Mia Vance, a seasoned fighter pilot who had served in humanity's most dangerous campaigns, and Lieutenant Kai Reddick, young but brilliant tactician known for his unconventional methods. Together, they formed the backbone of the strike team. As the days passed, the team's training intensified. They simulated every possible scenario, from enemy ambushes to system failures. The mission would be long, dangerous, and fraught with obstacles, but they had no choice but to move forward. The galaxy's fate rested on their shoulders. In the meantime, the Gorath continued their campaign of terror. More planets fell, and more species were subjugated. The news of their brutal conquest spread like wildfire, striking fear into the hearts of every living being across the galaxy. Some worlds attempted to surrender, hoping for mercy, but none were granted it. The Gorath left nothing but ashes in their wake. But in the quiet corners of the galaxy, a small group of people had gathered, united by one simple, but powerful belief: they were not going to let this happen. Humanity's fight for survival was just beginning, and they were ready to give everything to make sure the galaxy would live to see another day. The clock was ticking. Every passing day meant more planets lost to the Gorath's relentless march. Humanity's strike team, led by General Marcus Kane, Captain Mia Vance, and Lieutenant Kai Reddick, was preparing for its most dangerous mission yet, a strike deep within enemy lines to cripple the Gorath's command ship. It was a mission few thought they would survive, but they were humanity's best hope for turning the tide. The team was ready, but the odds were still staggering. Humanity had managed to assemble a fleet of ships equipped with the newly developed stealth technology, shields that could momentarily cloak their ships from the Gorath's sensors. It wasn't perfect, and it wouldn't last long, but it was their best chance. The Gorath would surely notice their presence as soon as they came within range of their command ship, but by then, the team hoped to have already struck. "We only have one shot at this," General Kane said, looking out over the assembled fleet. His face was a mask of determination. "If we fail, we're not just losing a battle. We're losing everything. But I believe in every one of you. We'll get this done, together." Captain Vance, as always, was the first to speak up. "The moment we hit their perimeter, we're going to be hunted. They'll be coming for us with everything they've got. Our job is to stay on target, no matter what. We can't afford distractions." Kai Reddick, the youngest member of the team but one of the brightest minds in the galaxy, was already buried in the mission data, running through simulations in his head. He was the team strategist, the one who had come up with the unorthodox plans that made the impossible seem like it had a chance. His voice was quiet but filled with conviction. "Once we disable their shields, we'll have a window of about 15 seconds before their reinforcements arrive. It'll be chaos. But chaos is a language we speak well." The team shared a brief moment of tense silence, understanding the gravity of the task ahead. The plan was simple in concept: infiltrate the Gorath-controlled space, disable the command ship's shields using a specialized energy weapon, and then launch a full-scale assault to destroy it. The objective was to buy the galaxy enough time to regroup and counterattack, but the risks were incalculable. The Gorath were ruthless, and their fleet was vast. Even the slightest misstep could mean the end for all of them. The journey to the Gorath-controlled sector took several days. The stealth ships moved silently through the void, their advanced cloaking systems keeping them hidden from the enemy's watchful eyes. As they approached the outer edge of Gorath space, the tension on the ships grew unbearable. Each team member was focused, their minds racing through possible scenarios, their bodies tense in anticipation. On board the flagship, Captain Vance stood at the helm, staring at the holographic map of their route. The Gorath's command ship was still several light-years away, but they could feel its presence, like a dark star looming in the distance. The closer they got, the more vulnerable they became. "We're approaching their perimeter," Vance said, her voice steady but laced with an undercurrent of concern. "Prepare yourselves. Once we enter their range, all bets are off. Kai Reddick adjusted the display on his console. I've calculated the path. We'll need to keep our trajectory tight to avoid detection. The Goratha's sensor range is enormous. A misstep and we'll be caught in their web. For the next few hours, the fleet inched closer to their target. Every moment felt like an eternity. The sheer scale of the Goratha's empire was overwhelming. The team knew they were walking into the heart of the storm, and they couldn't help but wonder if they were already too late. When they finally crossed into Gorath-controlled space, the silence was shattered by the first signs of enemy activity. Distant ships patrolled the area, their massive forms gliding effortlessly through space. The Gorath, though known for their ruthlessness, were highly efficient. They didn't waste resources or time, and their military was built on swift, coordinated strikes. There was no room for error. Stealth field engaged, Vance ordered. We're invisible. For now. But the tension didn't dissipate. If anything, it grew even more intense. The crew knew that they had a limited window. Any moment now, the Gorath could detect them, and when that happened, the hunt would begin. As they neared the command ship, General Kane signaled to initiate the second phase of their mission. The cloaking devices would be deactivated momentarily, and they would make their final assault. The stealth ships, now fully exposed, would need to strike quickly and decisively. The Goratha's command ship loomed before them, a massive, dark fortress that seemed to swallow light itself. Its defenses were formidable, a labyrinth of turrets, shields, and weapon platforms. But humanity had learned from every battle, every failed attempt, and every victory that had brought them to this point. "General, we're in position," said one of the fleet's officers, voice tight with anticipation. "Shields will be down in 10 seconds. The team's heartbeats quickened. General Kane nodded, his gaze steely. "This is it. Everyone, execute on my mark. We strike fast, we hit hard, and we get out before they can react." The seconds stretched into what felt like an eternity, the weight of the mission pressing down on them. Then, with a sharp command from Kane, the weapons were activated. The pulse of energy erupted from the human ships, slamming into the Goratha's shield array with a deafening roar. For the briefest of moments, the mighty defenses flickered, just long enough for the strike team to capitalize on it. Captain Vance's ship surged forward, its targeting systems locked onto the command ship's central core. "Now!" Vance shouted, leading the charge. The battle had begun. With the fate of the galaxy hanging in the balance, humanity's most daring mission was about to unfold in the heart of the Goratha's empire. The stakes were higher than ever, and the outcome was uncertain. Would humanity's ingenuity be enough to change the tide of war? Or would they be crushed under the might of the invaders?
The battle erupted with a ferocity that none of them had anticipated. The pulse weapon, though successful in temporarily disabling the Goratha's shields, had only delayed the inevitable. The Gorath were quick to adapt. Their fleet, though momentarily stunned by the strike, began to rally, hunting down the intruding ships with chilling efficiency. As the human fleet broke away from the command ship, General Kane's voice rang out over the comms, his tone a blend of urgency and resolve. "Fall back. We're not here to fight them all, we need to finish the job. Focus on the core." Captain Mia Vance, her pulse racing from the sudden onslaught, quickly adjusted her ship's course, dodging incoming fire as she flew through a narrow gap in the Gorath fleet. Her ship's stealth field had been deactivated, and now every movement was critical. The Gorath were everywhere, their ships swarming like predatory birds closing in on their prey. Almost there, Vance muttered to herself, barely avoiding a direct hit from a Gorath battleship's plasma beam. Come on, come on." Lieutenant Kai Reddick, who had been coordinating the strike, watched the data streams with a cold focus. His eyes flicked between the screens as he calculated their next move. "We're going to have a problem," he said, his voice cutting through the tension. "Their reinforcements are on the move. If we don't hit that core now, we won't make it out." "We'll hit it," Vance said through clenched teeth. "We have no choice." In the distance, the Gorath command ship loomed larger, a behemoth of dark metal, its surface covered in sharp, angular plating and brutal weapon arrays. It was a ship built for destruction, a symbol of the invaders' cold efficiency. Its defenses were formidable, but now, with the shields down, they had a brief window to strike. Vance's pulse quickened as she began the final approach. The ship's targeting systems locked onto the central core, the heart of the Gorath vessel. Just as the moment of impact neared, an explosion rang out, tearing through the space beside her ship. "Captain." Reddick's voice echoed over the comms. "We've got a major problem. They've launched interceptors. We can't make it through in one piece." Vance's hands tightened around the controls. "We don't have time for options, Kai. Hold on tight." Her ship shot forward, threading the needle between the swarm of Gorath interceptors that were converging on her. Every maneuver was a risk, every second closer to the heart of the command ship was a gamble, but it was the only chance they had. The rest of the human fleet, though still in retreat, fired everything they had to keep the Gorath distracted, giving Vance the opening she needed. "We're nearly there," she yelled, adrenaline surging through her. "Prepare for impact." With a violent jolt, her ship surged forward, the explosive force of the pulse weapon shaking the vessel as it discharged at full power, sending a concentrated beam directly at the Gorath command ship's core. For a split second, everything went still. The ship was engulfed in a brilliant light, a flash that illuminated the space around them. The crew braced for the worst, their hearts pounding in their chests. The energy released was more powerful than they had anticipated, too powerful for the Gorath ship's defenses to handle. And then, the unthinkable happened. The entire Gorath command ship, once an indestructible fortress, shuddered violently. The core, the heart of the vessel, erupted in a blast that sent shockwaves through the surrounding space. For a moment, there was nothing but the deafening silence of space, broken only by the crackling of damaged communication systems. Did it work? General Kane's voice was almost a whisper, filled with disbelief. We hit it." Reddick confirmed, his voice tight with excitement. "The core is down. The ship's internal systems are failing." Vance's heart skipped a beat. The moment of triumph was short-lived, however, as the Gorath fleet quickly realized the damage done to their command ship. It was still alive, but the core was destabilizing rapidly. The fleet began to shift into defensive formations, preparing for a desperate last stand. "General, the rest of the fleet is coming at us," Vance warned, her voice laced with urgency. "We're not out of the woods yet." Kane's voice cut through the chaos. "Fall back, all units. Get out of there before they can regroup. Our mission is complete. We've given the galaxy the chance it needs." The human fleet, now heavily damaged, turned in unison, their ships retreating as the Gorath command ship continued to fracture under the strain of the attack. The explosion of the core sent out shockwaves, but the Gorath were still a threat. They were resilient, relentless, and they would not go down easily. As the last of the human ships retreated, Vance's ship soared into hyperspace, narrowly avoiding a final barrage of fire from the Gorath. "We did it," she whispered, the weight of the battle settling in her chest. "We actually did it." Back at the Galactic Summit, the leaders of the allied species were receiving word of humanity's success. Though it was still uncertain whether the Gorath would regroup or be pushed back entirely, the damage to their command ship was enough to throw their coordinated attacks into disarray. The Alliance now had the breathing room they needed to launch a counteroffensive. The hope for victory, once nearly extinguished, had reignited. But the cost had been high. Many lives had been lost, both in space and on the planets that had fallen before the Gorath. Humanity's strike had been a gamble, but it had paid off, for now. As the fleet returned to their staging area, General Kane addressed his team, his voice filled with grim satisfaction. "We've won a battle. But this war is far from over. The Gorath will come for us all, again." We can't let our guard down. Captain Vance nodded. We'll be ready, sir. Humanity won't stop fighting. The galaxy had been given a momentary reprieve. The Goroth were still out there, their rage bound to be unleashed in retaliation. But the Alliance had shown what they were capable of, and humanity had proven that even against impossible odds, they could come together and win. The fight for the galaxy had only just begun.
The aftermath of the battle was a delicate balance between triumph and heavy loss. Humanity had dealt a significant blow to the Goroth, and for the first time, the galaxy's defenders saw a glimmer of hope. The command ship's destruction had sent shockwaves through the Goroth fleet, causing disarray and confusion. But the victory was far from complete. The Goroth, while temporarily crippled, were far from defeated. And with every battle, the stakes grew higher. Back at the Galactic Summit, the leaders of the allied species convened once more, their faces somber. The initial euphoria over the destruction of the command ship was quickly tempered by the reality that the Goroth would not simply retreat. The Goroth were ruthless, and they would not forget this defeat. "We've bought ourselves some time," President Elena Reyes addressed the summit, her voice steady but laced with concern. "But we can't rest on our laurels. The Goroth are reorganizing, and they'll be coming for us harder than ever." General Marcus Kane, his face worn from the strain of the mission, stood beside her, his tone grim. "We've weakened their command structure, but the Goroth are a hive mind. Even without their central command, they're still formidable. They'll adapt quickly. We need to strike while they're still reeling." The leaders of the other species exchanged uneasy glances. The Zelra had proven to be valuable allies, contributing their advanced stealth technology to the mission, but their commitment to the Alliance remained uncertain. The Velder, while willing to offer limited assistance, still viewed humanity with suspicion. Only the Altair, the most militarily advanced species in the galaxy, had fully committed to the cause, though their motivations were unclear. Kai Reddick, who had been working tirelessly on intelligence gathering, spoke up. "We've detected a significant concentration of Goroth fleet activity in the Rosen system. It seems like they're regrouping there, preparing for a retaliatory strike. If we can hit them hard now, while they're still disorganized, we might be able to cripple their fleet for good." Vance, who had been quiet until now, nodded. "We can't let them recover. If we give them the time to regroup, we might lose our advantage." The plan was set into motion immediately. A large-scale counteroffensive would be launched in the Rosen system, with the goal of preventing the Goroth from regrouping and solidifying their position. However, this was no longer just a matter of military strategy, it was a fight for survival, and the stakes had never been higher. The human fleet, still recovering from their previous mission, had to prepare quickly. Many of their ships had sustained severe damage during the attack on the Goroth command ship, and repairs were urgently needed. Yet, they had no choice but to press on. Every day counted, and the window of opportunity to strike at the heart of the Goroth was closing fast. As the fleets assembled for the assault, the toll of the war weighed heavily on everyone. The strike team that had disabled the command ship was reassembled, though not all of them had returned. Some of the crew members had perished during the battle, heroes whose sacrifices had paved the way for this moment of hope. Their loss was a reminder of the cost of war, and the emotional weight was felt deeply by those who had survived. To those who didn't make it back, Captain Vance said quietly, her voice tinged with sorrow as she stood with the remaining members of the team. "Their sacrifice won't be forgotten. We fight for them now." The fleet was ready to move out, but as they neared the Rosen system, a new challenge presented itself. Intelligence reports suggested that the Goroth had developed a new type of weapon, something far more destructive than anything they had encountered before. Rumors had circulated that the Goroth had harnessed a devastating energy source that could annihilate entire fleets in a single blow. "Whatever this weapon is," General Kane said, his expression hardening, "we need to find a way to counter it. If the Goroth are even half as close to completing it as we fear, we may be facing our most dangerous threat yet." The Alliance scrambled to prepare. The Zelra offered their expertise on energy shielding, hoping to find a way to mitigate the potential damage of this new weapon. Meanwhile, Dr. Sophie Liu, humanity's leading scientist, worked with engineers to adapt their existing technology, searching for any advantage they could find. Days turned into weeks as the fleet made its way toward the Rosen system. The crew, worn thin by the relentless pace, remained focused. The realization that the final battle for the galaxy was drawing nearer hung over them like a storm cloud. When they finally arrived in the Rosen system, they found it eerily quiet. No sign of the Gorath fleet. No activity. Nothing. "We've been set up," Reddick said, his eyes scanning the radar. "This is too quiet. It's a trap." And then, as if on cue, the Gorath fleet emerged from the nearby asteroid field, their ships rising like dark, monstrous shapes. But the most horrifying sight wasn't the size of the fleet, it was the weapon they had been warned about. A massive Gorath warship, unlike anything they had ever seen, emerged from the shadows. Its surface was lined with glowing energy conduits, and at the heart of the ship was a massive energy cannon, humming with destructive power. "That's the weapon," Vance said, her voice tight with disbelief. "We're running out of time." General Kane made his decision in an instant. "Engage the fleet. Focus all firepower on that ship. If we don't destroy it, we won't survive this." The final battle was upon them. Humanity's hope for the galaxy now rested on their ability to stop the Gorath's new weapon, a weapon that could end the war before it had truly begun. Every ship, every soldier, every piece of technology humanity had worked for now had one purpose: to destroy the weapon before it destroyed them all. The Rosen system was a graveyard of stars, a silent reminder of countless battles fought over the centuries. The Gorath fleet had set the stage for what would undoubtedly be the most desperate and decisive confrontation humanity had ever faced. In the heart of the system, the massive Gorath warship loomed like an impenetrable fortress, its weapons crackling with the kind of energy that could obliterate entire fleets with a single shot. Its power was undeniable, and the stakes had never been higher. "That's the weapon we've been dreading," Captain Vance said, her voice a mixture of awe and fear. "If that thing fires, it's over for us." The human fleet, still recovering from the previous battle, gathered at a safe distance, trying to regroup and form a cohesive plan. General Marcus Kane stood on the bridge of the flagship, watching the massive Gorath ship on the viewscreen. His mind was racing, calculating every potential strategy, but he knew the truth: this might be the final mission for them all. "We've got one shot at this," Kane said, addressing his crew with his usual calm determination. "We hit them hard and fast. We can't afford to give them time to power up that weapon. If we do, we're finished. We've got no choice but to go in," Vance replied, her voice unwavering. "We'll have to take out that weapon or it's game over." The Gorath warship, the Titanus, was an overwhelming force, and its weapons were nothing short of devastating. According to the latest intelligence from Kai Reddick, the energy cannon in its core had been designed to target and destroy entire fleets in a matter of seconds. The weapon's activation had been delayed so far by the disarray of the Gorath fleet after losing their command ship, but now, it was ready to fire. "We've got a problem," Reddick said from the operations station, his fingers flying across the controls. "The Titanus is more heavily shielded than we expected. Any direct attack will be met with heavy retaliation." General Kane grimaced. "Then we'll have to do it the hard way." The human fleet broke formation, launching their attack on the Gorath forces. Every ship was a potential target, and the stakes had never been so high. The Titanus moved forward, its massive form blocking the path to the rest of the Gorath fleet, its weapon charging up for the devastating shot. The human ships, though outmatched in sheer firepower, had one advantage: their speed and agility. Vance, as always, took the lead, her ship darting and weaving through the enemy fire as she closed the gap between them and the Titanus. "We're going to need a distraction," Vance said, her eyes narrowing as she surveyed the situation. "If we can keep their focus on us, we might be able to find a weak spot." "We can buy you some time," Reddick replied, already pulling up a series of tactical options. "But it's not going to be easy. The Titanus has defenses we haven't seen before, fluctuating shields, an adaptive targeting system. we're going to have to be unpredictable. Kane turned to the crew. All right, here's the plan. Vance, you take your team in to engage the Titanus head-on. Disrupt their shields, keep their fire focused on you as long as possible. I'll lead the rest of the fleet in a series of feints to draw their attention. We'll create an opening, and then we'll hit them with everything we've got. The plan was risky, almost suicidal, but there was no other option. Humanity's last hope rested on this desperate attack. The battle raged on, the clash of human and Gorath forces creating a chaotic dance of fire and destruction. The human fleet held its ground, but the Titanus was not easily shaken. It fired relentlessly, its weapons decimating smaller ships that ventured too close. General, we need to act now. Vance shouted over the comms. She and her team had made it to the front lines, and her ship was under heavy fire. We can't keep dodging their attacks forever. Hang in there, Captain. Kane responded. We're almost in position. The human ships pushed forward, each wave taking heavy casualties, but they pressed on. Every ship in the fleet fired in coordinated bursts, keeping the Gorath occupied and off balance. But even as the attacks rained down, it became clear that the Titanus wasn't as vulnerable as they had hoped. Then, a breakthrough came. Kai Reddick, who had been analyzing the Gorath ship systems, found the weakness they had been hoping for, a single, exposed power conduit beneath the Titanus' shields, one that if struck correctly, could cause a chain reaction in the ship's energy systems. But it was a long shot. We've got a shot at its weak spot, Reddick said urgently, his voice a sharp contrast to the chaos around him. If we can target the energy conduit, we might have a chance to disable that cannon. Vance nodded, determination in her eyes. It's all or nothing. We go in. With everything on the line, Vance led her team in a final, desperate charge toward the Titanus. Their ships swerved and spun as they dodged plasma fire, the weight of their task pressing down on them. They had to time their strike perfectly. The Titanus fired its cannon, unleashing a pulse of destructive energy that tore through a nearby fleet, vaporizing several ships in seconds. It was the beginning of the end if they failed. Now! Vance screamed. The human ships locked onto the weak point with pinpoint accuracy, unleashing a devastating barrage of firepower at the exposed conduit. The explosion that followed was unlike anything they had ever witnessed. The Titanus shuddered violently, and for a split second, everything seemed to freeze. Then, the core of the Gorath warship detonated, sending shockwaves through the system. The energy cannon, still primed to fire, backfired with explosive force, disintegrating the ship from within. The Gorath fleet, already disoriented by the loss of their command ship and the Titanus, was thrown into complete chaos. We did it, Reddick said, his voice filled with awe. But the victory was bittersweet. The destruction of the Titanus was only a small part of the war that still raged across the galaxy. The Gorath were far from defeated, they would regroup, adapt, and retaliate. But for now, humanity had struck a crippling blow to their invaders. Kane looked out at the remnants of the Gorath fleet, his expression hard and unyielding. This isn't over. But we've shown them what humanity is capable of. With the death of their mightiest weapon, the Gorath were left reeling, but the final battle was still yet to come. The destruction of the Titanus sent shockwaves through the Gorath ranks. Their greatest weapon, an unstoppable force of destruction, had been obliterated by the very species they once considered weak and insignificant. For the first time in their existence, the Gorath knew fear. But fear did not mean surrender. Across the battlefield, scattered Gorath warships fought with desperate fury, unwilling to accept defeat. Their forces, though battered and leaderless, still outnumbered humanity's fleet. The battle was not yet won. On board the human flagship Endeavour, General Kane took stock of their dwindling forces. We need to push them now, he ordered. If we give them time to regroup, we lose everything. Captain Vance, her ship barely holding together after the last engagement, gritted her teeth. We're running on fumes, General. If we're doing this, we need to end it fast. Kai Reddick, watching the Gorath fleet's frantic maneuvers from his tactical station, suddenly spoke. "They're in full retreat," he said, disbelief in his voice. "They're abandoning the battlefield." The bridge fell silent. "Confirm that," Kane said, his voice sharp. The sensors didn't lie. The Gorath were retreating, not falling back to regroup, but running. Ships warped away at a frantic pace, some colliding with debris in their haste. The mighty war machine that had terrorized the galaxy for decades was breaking apart. "They're done," Reddick whispered. "We won." A stunned silence filled the bridge before it erupted into cheers. Across the fleet, exhausted pilots and battered soldiers let out cries of victory, knowing they had survived the impossible. But Kane's expression remained hard. "No celebrations yet," he said. "We need to make sure they don't come back." For days, the coalition forces scoured the sector, ensuring no remnants of the Gorath fleet remained. The once mighty empire had shattered, its central leadership destroyed, its strongest weapon obliterated, and its fleet reduced to disorganized warbands fleeing into deep space. The war was over, but the cost had been immense. The aftermath. Back at the Galactic Summit, leaders from across the galaxy gathered to discuss the future. Humanity, once seen as an isolated backwater species, had become the saviors of the galaxy. The Zelra, Velder, and Altair representatives, who had once debated whether humans were worth allying with, now looked at them with something close to reverence. President Elena Reyes stood before them, her voice unwavering. "The Gorath have fallen, but we cannot afford to make the mistakes of the past. We must rebuild, together, and ensure that no empire ever threatens our existence again." The galaxy was forever changed. The old power structures had crumbled, and in their place, a new alliance began to take shape. This time, humanity was not just a member, they were a leader. Kai Reddick, watching from the sidelines, smirked. Who would have thought? The species no one took seriously just saved the galaxy. General Kane, standing beside him, nodded. "We did what had to be done. And now, we make sure it was worth it." The legacy of humanity. In the following years, the war became legend. Humanity's daring strategies, unyielding determination, and sheer refusal to surrender became a story told across the stars. Where once they had been an afterthought, now they were the defenders of peace, the ones who had turned the tide when all seemed lost. But war had changed them. Humanity was no longer the same species that had first ventured into the stars. They had faced extinction, stood against an impossible enemy, and won. And if another threat ever came for them, the galaxy now knew one undeniable truth. Against all odds, humanity would always stand.